And let's start things off in the Atlantic Division. So when I was looking at the point totals on DraftKings Sportsbook and I was I was organizing all the divisions, I kind of looked at this division as a stars and scrubs division based on the point totals. And I'll run them down for you here and explain why. So we start things off with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Their over-under point total is set at 108.5. So they're projected to finish first in the Atlantic Division. Mm-hmm. Second is your Toronto Maple Leafs at 106.5 points. And actually, the Leafs have the second highest team point total in the Eastern Conference. So right now, Vegas pretty much thinks that the Leafs are a top 3 team, let's call it, in the Eastern Conference. So they got Tampa number 1, Leafs number 2, Boston coming in at number 3 at 103.5 points. The Florida Panthers next at 101.5. So all 4 of those teams, Lightning, Leafs, Bruins, Panthers, all have an over-under of over 100 points. Yeah. And that is the only division in the entire NHL that is projected like that.
Yeah.
And the reason I call this a stars and scrubs division, because in the bottom 4 teams in this division, the books just do not like these teams. So Montreal, after getting to the Stanley Cup final this past season, they're at 89.5 points for this upcoming season. Then you have Detroit, 77.5. The Ottawa Senators, their over-under point total, just 72.5. And then you have the Buffalo Sabres at the basement of the Atlantic Division, 68.5 total points that team is projected for. So, Lepore, your initial thoughts on these point totals in the Atlantic Division. And I guess we can start things off with, of course, the Toronto Maple Leafs.
With your Toronto Maple Leafs. So the number was what? 106.5 over under. I'm going to say this a lot throughout the show. So when I see over unders, what I try to do is I try to look at a point total that is over that number and below that number and ask myself, like, what's more likely? So I look at the Leafs at that number and I ask myself, what's more likely? Say, let's use 10 points. The Leafs getting 116, 117 points, or like 96, 97 points, where it's like they get to like a wild card spot. If I'm being perfectly honest, I think it's more likely that we see the latter. I think it's more likely that we see a situation where the Leafs are still a really good team, but not a bonkers team, make the playoffs semi-comfortably. But I don't see that situation, and I hope I'm wrong here. This is a Toronto Maple Leafs podcast. I don't see that situation where the Leafs are fighting for like 120 points, like getting to a total like that. So looking at it evenly at 106.5, I think a number below that is a lot more likely. So on the Toronto Maple Leafs, I will pick the under.
Ooh, okay, Lepore.
But not a homer, everybody. Not a homer. Take that.
And there it is for all you trolls in the comments that call us homers. Unbelievable. But anyway, no, Lepore, you make some really good points there. And, just going back to last season, and listen, I know everyone said it was the Canadian division and the division sucked and this and that. And it was just it was all these cupcake teams. Well, first of all, the Canadian division, I think, proved that it was a lot better than people realized. And obviously we saw the Montreal Canadiens get to the Stanley Cup final against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And obviously the Leafs had a really good season. You had Connor McDavid, who had one of the greatest offensive seasons we've ever seen. So I think that division, it was really blown out of proportion just in terms of the amount of just vitriol and just BS that was spewed towards the competitiveness of that division. Mm-hmm. But the Leafs last season played at a 113 point pace. Okay. And I get it. They just played, the same teams all year, the same 6 teams all year. Right. But they did play at a 113 point pace. But saying that, I do tend to agree more with Lepore here, because I would take the under as well of 106.5 points. I just 107 points. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
And there's like the really good teams, the team that wins the President's Trophy, they're going to go nuts. They're going to get, 115 points, something in that range. But I just think over the course of an 82 game season, I think the Leafs are probably going to get over 100 points, but I think they're going to fall somewhere between like 100 and 105.
Sure.
Like, I think they're going to make the playoffs. For the people out there that think they're not going to make the playoffs, just look at what the books are saying right now.
Yeah, and breathe, everybody, breathe.
Right?
Breathe.
Like, despite all the bullshit from last season, embarrassing themselves in the first round against Montreal, the books still have the Leafs finishing with the second highest point total in the entire Eastern Conference behind the Tampa Bay Lightning. But yeah, 106.5 points. I'm taking the under on that, Lepore. And just to look at the Leafs history, is it 105 points that's their franchise record?
It might be. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, that's a good season. But if you look at it with some perspective of this team's over 100 years old, and that's the most points they've ever got. Like, they've never had 110 point season. It's in and around there. It's like 105 or 106 or something.
Yeah, I'm just checking it right now. So it is 105. In 2017, 2018, The Leafs had 105 points. That was the first year they lost to the Bruins in the first round of the playoffs in 7 games. But yeah, man, I'm taking the under on that. And any other thoughts on any of the other teams in this division?
Just going through them quickly. One that really jumped out at me actually was the Sens, because like, what do they have them at? Like 72 points,
72.5.
And again, like my thought process before, it's like, what's more likely, the Sens getting 62 points or 82 points? So I look, I'm like, I don't think they're that bad, that they're going to be like a bad team. And I think there's a chance that, yeah, the young team up and coming, they can surprise people if they gel well, this and that. Like, that number to me, like, I'm going over on that one, just based and like, how bad can they really be? And even I know what Vegas is thinking. They're looking at the division they played in last year compared to this division, where you're playing Tampa, Toronto, Boston, Florida often. So they look at it from the perspective of Ottawa and say, yeah, they have a lot tougher of a road this year, because maybe some people compare their points totals from last year. But I'm taking the over on that one. Like, I think that one to me might be the most intriguing in the whole league. Like, for them to think the Sens are going to be that bad.
Yeah, because just looking at the entire Eastern Conference, Lepore, they basically have the Senators. This is DraftKings Sportsbook. I should reiterate that. They have the Senators as the third lowest point total in the entire Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
So they have the Sabres as in dead last. And then actually, Lepore, I lied. They have the Senators as the second worst point total. So it's Buffalo and Ottawa. And then after that, they got Columbus with the third worst. And they have Detroit as better than all three of those teams. So they have Detroit with a higher point total than Ottawa, Buffalo, and Columbus.
Weird one. Yeah, like Ottawa picked 10th overall, 11th overall. So again, like, they had that nice run at the end. And again, like, I'm not like, you never want to say, oh, it's a slam dunk 100%. This team's going to make the playoffs. But I show you like 72 points. Like, I don't know, like even in the mid to high 70s, like, I don't think they're going to be that bad, that they're going to be like in the 60s. Like I really feel that way.
Yeah. Like, I think it's time for them to take that next step, because I'm just looking at their point totals, and I'll go back to the last 82 game season that we saw in the NHL. That was 2018, 2019. The Senators finished with 64 points. The year before that, 67 points. I mean, obviously they've been bad for the last 4 years, right?
But those 2 years, they kind of like tanked it in halfway. Then the next year they kind of tanked on purpose. So
exactly, right? Like, we all know the Senators have been going through this rebuild, but Lepore, I think I agree with you on this one as well. Like, I would take the over, but I think it's like a slight over. Like, I don't see this team making the playoffs, but I think there is a pretty high possibility that we see them finish with somewhere between like 72 and 80 points.
Yeah.
Something in that range. So yeah, I would definitely take the over with that as well. The other Canadian team in this division, the Montreal Canadiens, they have the 12th highest team point total in the Eastern Conference. So after getting to the Stanley Cup final, Carey Price reemerging as the Carey Price of old, and the great defensive play that we saw from their top four. Obviously, Shea Weber is going to miss the entire season with the injuries that he's been dealing with. But the books are giving this Habs team no respect whatsoever. They have them finishing with under 90 points. And Lepore, the last 82-game season, like I mentioned, the NHL was in 2018, 2019. You needed 90 points to get into the playoffs. So the Colorado Avalanche were, let's call them the number 16 seed. They got in with 90 points. So,
and that's low. Like that's historic. Usually it's like in the mid 90s, like 94 or 96. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like 90s low.
But yeah, the Habs at 89.5 points. So what's your take on that?
It's kind of funny to me because like we all know how Vegas works. Like when they circle a team, even like circle a specific game, certain teams, certain brands, they pump up. Like people always say, like, I'm a big Notre Dame football fan, and Notre Dame, I think I saw somewhere like over the last 20, 30 years, they're the worst team in all of sports against the spread because it's Notre Dame's. They always give them a few points because it's like, oh, Notre Dame, like when people bet, right? So like with Montreal, what I find weird is like, number one, it's Montreal. And number two, they're coming off the Stanley Cup final. So like that casual bettor thinking like they're going to miss the playoffs, like, oh, I'm taking the over. But Vegas isn't even thinking that way. So you think they would have like kind of like higher than you might think, like, oh, okay, pump the brakes a little bit. But no, they're saying they're fighting for 90 points. So like Vegas has no faith. But to be honest, like that's about where I would put Montreal. Like, I don't think Montreal is bad. Like, I still think they're like in and around that number of where they put them. But if I had to bet on it, oof, the house is on the line. I'll go under, Bruno. I'll go under.
Yeah, I'm taking the under too.
Yeah, I'll go under.
And call us Habs haters if you want, but I think the books are right on the money here with this team because, I mean, you just look at what the Habs have done in the regular season the last 2 years. They had the 18th best record in the regular season this past season when they made it to the Cup final. They had the 24th best record in the league the year before that when they were invited to the return to play format and took out the Pittsburgh Penguins in the qualifying round. So,
and they missed the playoffs the 2 years before that. Like people forget, like, and again, like, hate on me all you want. Like this team hasn't put up a regular season record good enough to make the playoffs in a regular format in 5 seasons.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And that year they did make it. That was the year the divisions were all out of whack. Like the other division was very strong. So like teams bet like Montreal, the other division benefited, like the lower team benefited from being low and they got to play Montreal as opposed to playing Pittsburgh and Washington. So the Rangers played Montreal. Actually, the Rangers beat Montreal. So it was just like, yeah, like they haven't made it legitimately in 5 years. And that one, they were out in the first round. So
yeah, the last time they made the playoffs in an 82 game season was 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time. So yeah, I think that number is right on the money. And based on the Shea Weber situation, he's on long-term injured reserve. Like those are big shoes to fill. And I know Habs fans are talking about David Savard and saying that he can provide some of the elements that Shea Weber was able to bring, over the last number of years, being basically the heart and soul of that Habs franchise. But no one is replacing Shea Weber. And then
the man.
And then even their goaltending, right? Like, I know Carey Price was incredible in the playoffs, but Carey Price has not been good in the regular season the last 3 seasons. So, I mean, I know Jake Allen's still there as well, and he's probably going to have a solid year, but you add all those things together. They're still struggling with their depth down the middle at the center position. And, then you have this Kotkaniemi situation, which we'll obviously get into later in the podcast with the offer sheet from the Carolina Hurricanes. But yeah, I'm taking the under as well. Like I right now, I think the Habs are going to miss the playoffs. And maybe at best they're fighting. I think at best they're fighting for a wild card spot. I'll just go out and say.
Yeah. Well, you look at the teams in the division. Like I don't think anyone objectively can say that this team is going to finish ahead of and like make the bet that they would finish ahead of at even money Tampa, Toronto, Florida, or Boston. Like, no, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Not saying it's impossible, but I don't think anyone would lay that bet at even money.
Yeah, exactly. Any other thoughts about this division, Lepore, before we move on to the Metro?
Well, really quickly, Boston was what, 90? No, sorry, Boston was 103 and a half. What do you think about that one? That one's intriguing.
Yeah, that one's because I'm a little bit lower on Boston. I would take the under on that because I'm just not as high on this Bruins team. And I think the loss of David Krejci, who went home to play in the Czech Republic, I think that's a big loss for them. Their number 2 center out the door. I think that's going to be a big hit on, their scoring, their top 6. Just, I think David Krejci, and listen, he's not like a superstar player by any means. He's not on the same tier as Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak, but he's a very important player for them.
Yeah,
And I just go down that roster, and it just doesn't. I just don't get excited looking at that Bruins roster. I just think they're lacking a little bit of talent after their big boys. And yeah, I still think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think I would take the under. Like I see Boston finishing with maybe in the high 90s, and maybe they hit 100 points, but 103.5. I'm definitely taking the under on the Bruins.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Like again, I think they're a really good team. I think they'll make the playoffs semi comfortably. But again, like I look at the things that are more likely. Like to me, say at a 5-point gap, like I don't think Boston's going to push say 110 points, but I could see them in the high 90s, like you say. So I would take the under as well.
And what's interesting, actually, Lepore, about these top 4 teams in the Atlantic, Lightning, Leafs, Bruins, and Panthers, DraftKings has them finishing with the 4 highest point totals in the entire Eastern Conference.
Nice.
So they have them finishing with a higher point total than any team in the Metropolitan Division. So
nice.
That shows you that this Atlantic Division, it's going to be tough. And I know there's some bottom feeders as well that, we talked about, like Buffalo and Detroit, and, even if you still view the Senators as a bottom feeder, but those top 4 teams, man, oh man, the Vegas is high on those teams this season.
Something I'll throw out there that's like kind of interesting to look at. So our favorite guy, Dom Lucian, he came out with his total points projections based on his underlying numbers. And I'll just fire through the division quickly. He has Tampa 112, Toronto 108, Florida 102, Boston 102, Montreal 91. This one's shocking. He has the Sabres at 81 points. He has them having like a not bad season. So I found that interesting. He has Detroit at 79, Ottawa at 72. So some of them mirrored pretty well what Vegas did, but like that Buffalo one, I mean, if you believe in Dom Lucian's model, over, like bet your house.
That's interesting. But you know what? I'll bet you if they trade Eichel, that drops by like 8 points.
Yeah, that it's funny. His model just may represent current rosters. So yeah, good call, Bruno. That is true.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, like if with Eichel, even with Eichel on that roster, yeah, like
81 points
or 81 points. I think that's stretching it a little bit.
It's 500. Like the Sabres, like it's so sad because everyone kind of like loves Buffalo and cheers for Buffalo. It's just sad to be like, there's no way they're going to be a 500 team. You know what I mean? 81 points. Just
the sad state of the Buffalo Sabres, man.
Great jerseys though.
Yeah, that's right. At least their jerseys are solid.
Yeah.
Oh God, that team, man. I honestly though, I really hope that they figure it out because I think the NHL really is better when the Buffalo Sabres are a good team.
It's like the Bills in the NFL. Like when Bills fans are everywhere, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I hope that franchise turns it around.